Some games were never meant to be played on Nintendo consoles. Anyone who's tried to play Doom on Switch could tell you that. Doom on Super Nintendo is pretty similar. In the 90s, id Software were making groundbreaking technical marvels that even most high-end PCs couldn't keep up with at the time. A Doom port on Super Nintendo had no right to exist, but its developer, Randy Linden, somehow made it work. 20 years later, he publicly released the source code for the game, allowing fans to see exactly how he did it. To be honest, it's a wonder that Linden, an independent developer, kept all his code and assets from 1995. Huge companies like Squaresoft literally threw out source code for some of their most popular games like Final Fantasy VIII and Kingdom Hearts. Source code and other background information like promotional materials, beta content, etc. are not only interesting but can be useful for developers. Unlike Square, Nintendo kept every bit of content they've ever produced. While most of this just sits on ice for years, never being touched, Nintendo in particular likes to make remakes. Lots and lots of remakes. Having the original code and assets at full, uncompressed quality makes their lives porting or improving remakes way easier. So while Nintendo easily pumps out ports for their games, Square was forced to completely rebuild the source code for Final Fantasy VIII from scratch. All this data has been kept closely guarded by Nintendo, but 2020 hits everyone. Leaks. They're problematic for many reasons. However, well-timed leaks can be beneficial to all different types of people. We see this all the time. Movie studios accidentally leaking images or story beats from their latest film, or influencers leaking information about themselves or competitors.
What's another word for...
Recently, Nintendo has been hit with some unintentional leaks with tons of data dropping online. Programmers today use a website known as GitHub, among other places, to store source code and any other assets that they may need on a server that's easily accessible for both active participants and long-time data storage. Back in the 90s, Nintendo obviously didn't have access to this, so they used an older resource like a CVS server. Sometime in May of 2020, an unnamed hacker gained access to these Nintendo servers and proceeded to mine all the data they could before being locked off. Since then, we've seen bits and pieces of this data being released to the public, with the most recent leak featuring many first-party N64 games. This includes classics like Star Fox 64, 1080 Snowboarding, Ocarina of Time, and Majora's Mask. On top of this, we've previously seen extensive leaks for many classic Super Nintendo and Game Boy games like Super Mario World and Link's Awakening DX. While we already have an extensive list of games, according to many sources, it's unlikely that these leaks will stop anytime soon. The hack included more than a terabyte of data, and we've only seen about half of that. This type of information, especially source code, is coveted by internet sleuths. Modders and speedrunners alike pine for this type of information to be released. So I guess we have it now. What can we do with it? Source code is useful for multiple different purposes that have crossover between communities. This code is so valuable that programmers around the world are attempting to rebuild it in their favorite games, essentially from scratch. This is using a process known as decompilation, and you can check out many different decomp projects, including the completed Super Mario 64 decomp and the in-progress Zelda 64 decomp projects. You'll see speedrunners, ROM hackers, and all different types of modders joining in to contribute to these projects, and it's because they all have something to gain from it. Normally, to make a ROM hack, modders need to use dumb workarounds to actually change things. They have to write with a much less powerful form of programming language when compared to C++, which most source code would be using. This would create a patch that could change Mario's running speed or the location of a secret entrance in North Clocktown, for example. With the source, no workarounds are needed. You have the real code. Just highlight a portion, press delete, type some new stuff, and boom, it's exactly what you want it to be. This is especially beneficial to randomizer fans. Currently, randomizers are constructed in very convoluted ways that are a detriment to their performance, both in gameplay stability, gameplay changes, and logic systems. Having access to the source code allows developers to bypass many of their previous roadblocks and implement much more advanced gameplay options and in general provide a much more stable experience. Having source code won't necessarily let speedrunners magically find new glitches, but what it will give them is knowledge. The source code is like a cryptic riddle. It doesn't immediately give you the answers that you want, but it does provide those who can interpret it with the information to better understand situations. The Zelda community is known for its detailed documentation for most, if not all of its games. They don't have all the answers though. Many assumptions have to be made about why certain things, even normal gameplay actions, function the way that they do. With the source code, glitch hunters receive an invaluable set of information required to solidify their assumptions as genuine hypotheses and apply that knowledge to potential glitch finds. This type of knowledge can also be used to port your favorite Nintendo games to PC. Since Nintendo's never going to do that, fans have taken it upon themselves attempting to do this from scratch. Some succeeded into making fully functioning versions of their favorite games playable on PC, one of which being Super Mario 64, derived from a successful decompilation project. This was completed rather recently and plays well on full HD graphics. Mario's polygons have never looked better. If you ask me, ports like this are the bona fide future for speedrunning or any speedrun adjacent community like randomizers. A PC port increases accessibility, especially for rare titles, and allows communities to implement anti-cheating measures into the games themselves. This makes the verification process easier. You can even implement like online races and co-op runs and a lot of other really cool ideas. I hope this gets picked up by some like popular communities soon, but I'm gonna need you to hold this chestnut in your head for a bit because there's some issues we have to discuss. These leaks resulted in hacking Nintendo servers, which is obviously a crime. The person responsible could be liable for a lot of legal repercussions if ever caught. The specific vulnerability has been fixed, but I won't be sharing the methods that they used for obvious reasons. Downloading the leaks on your personal computer isn't necessarily illegal, but using the data definitely can be. You'll often find this message at the end of Nintendo games.
All rights, including the copyrights of the game, scenario, music, and program, reserved by Nintendo.
This is Nintendo's explicit warning about infringing on their copyrights and what assets are constituted as a part of that protection. Nintendo aggressively protects their copyright, and if they have even an inkling of even die-hard non-profit fans infringing it, they will take action. Take the DMCA takedowns for many ROM hacks like AM2R for example. Those projects couldn't have even used Nintendo's source code at the time, but projects now can. It doesn't matter if they actually do. Since the information is out there, Nintendo could easily spark an investigation or just request a takedown with the assumption that it does. Further legal action can be taken on developers who are found to have actually used Nintendo's code. It's a huge legal risk, and I'm sure that won't deter some people from continuing their projects, cleanly or otherwise, but it's still a risk that could end many of our favorite projects for good one day. Not to mention that the N64 leaks are, to be frank, a bit disappointing. Now, don't take me the wrong way, I more mean that they've been misrepresented by the hype. Parts of the speedrunning community have hyped up discoveries like L is real 2401 and Ocarina of Time source code found, but many of these discoveries are just novelties. Luigi in Super Mario 64 is definitely a cool discovery. The development of putting all the pieces together, finding small lines of code, and reconstructing Exodia to flesh out working Luigi models in the game was hilarious and just super fun to watch, but it was just that, fun. At most, it shows that at one point Luigi was planned to be in SM64 and that they actually started working on him, but they scrapped the idea pretty quickly. It doesn't really tell us anything that we didn't know, and that type of information doesn't really further any goal. On top of that, the source for the most popular games are incomplete, at least in the N64 hack. Most of this data in the leaks have a V at the end of it, denoting that it was a version of the source code, but not necessarily the final version. This was likely a security measure since the N64 hack originates from Nintendo's transactions with Route3, the company behind the Chinese IQ. Source code data was likely only given to them on a need-to-have basis. For some games they may have needed all of it and gotten it in pieces, but for others they may have only needed small sections and never got the rest. That doesn't mean that we won't see more of the code leaked in the future. Perhaps we'll see people reconstructing code from separate leaks together, much like building Luigi, and somehow get full working source code from that. That's wishful thinking though. It's impossible to tell now if that will become an eventuality. Okay, let me stop being a killjoy for a second. I genuinely think that the content of these leaks and the work being put into it are great, and I don't want to take that away from anybody. But at the same time, I don't want to heighten people's expectations and put in a bunch of hype that a lot of other people online have been doing recently. With that being said, what's actually in these leaks? While more popular games like Zelda and Mario are incomplete, Star Fox 64, 1080 Snowboarding, and F-Zero X, among other titles, are completely or nearly so in their Chinese IQ versions. For the others, we get a lot of pieces of code that are pretty cool to look at. While I'm no computer scientist, watching my friends who are programmers break this down and discuss the code has been great. It seems like, if nothing else, an interesting window to how games had to be coded back in the N64 days. The leaks give insights to some shortcuts and workarounds developers needed to do in order to bypass the limited hardware of consoles at the time. Plebs like me are also treated to super high-res assets for each game. This includes box art, manuals, character and item renders, among other assets. Many of these things have been seen before with a simple Google search, but they've always been highly compressed and lost a lot of detail. Just looking at Ocarina of Time renders shows things like sculpturas, bottles, and the long shot with the amount of detail that looks amazing. There's way more cool content as well, including unused models and scrap dungeons. They've even uncovered a boss rush mode in Ocarina of Time and brought it back to life. A lot of this is being posted on Twitter and Reddit, so I suggest you check it out. The incomplete nature of this code is also ironically beneficial to many decompilation projects like the ones mentioned earlier. Decomp is a lot of work. It involves participants acquiring assembly code with a decompilation software from the file that functions as the game's .exe or executable file. This code isn't readable by a human. It's mostly just instructions about how parts of the code behave. A programmer would need to make assumptions based off of these instructions about what the source code likely is. It takes a lot of work, and despite working on it for months now, the Zelda 64 decomp project is only about 25% complete. If the complete source code was out there, it wouldn't completely invalidate the project. Many people involved are doing it because they love this and want to further understand Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask.
I do it because of my childhood love for the game. It feels like a big puzzle to me, where each function is a piece. It's very rewarding to me when I work at an unknown function of code and then realize I recognize what it does in the game. Like, hey, this is the function that spawns rupees when you cut grass.
It would, however, somewhat trivialize the results of a completed project. Most likely, with the source code out there, despite how illegal it would be, someone would make a PC port or an updated randomizer or other ROM hacks using it. This not only puts all of their projects in risk, but it also puts the decomp project in a tricky situation. They now have to make sure that people working on the project are not using leaked information, a near impossible task that is mostly built off of trust. I am interested to see what comes next of this and how this affects the speedrunning community in particular in the future. Maybe we'll get more PC ports out of it, or perhaps they'll end up canceling some really cool modding and decomp projects going on. Like, who knows? Only time will tell. If you like this video, press that button. If you didn't, well, press the other button. This is a really different type of video for me. I don't normally do anything of the reporting type on topics. I guess I have dabbled it in the past with when barrier skip was found, but I don't really feel like that was the same. If you want to see more stuff like this, let me know in the comments. And if there's any other topics or video ideas or suggestions, let me know. I'm pretty open to a lot of different stuff. Thank you for making this far, and thank you for watching.